While the Steelers are going crazy in free agency, it is March Madness in college basketball. We're going to talk about the remarkable tournament win for the Pitt Panthers right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Noah Hiles. We're out here on the road as we're getting ready to go from Dayton, Ohio to Greensboro, North Carolina. Lots to break down from this win, what it means for the program, who the next opponent is in Iowa State, and a look at the March Madness bracket. All that breaking down right here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here joined by Noah Hiles. We're both your Pitt beat writers here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that you can get all of our content at post-gazette.com. If you're enjoying this show, we have daily content that comes out from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on our podcasting platform, which you can get on any podcasting app, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as our daily content that comes out here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Noah, you and I covered a banger on Tuesday night. It was a late tip, but man, was it worth it. I just want to get your thoughts on the atmosphere that we were in Dayton, Ohio, with all the Pitt fans and the crazy win with Jamarius Burton hitting the shot that gave them the lead with 9.8 seconds left, and all the drama that went in between.
Onions. That's the way to sum it up. I mean, this is March, Carter. That atmosphere, not just for the Pitt game, but the game prior between A&M Corpus Christi and Southeast Missouri. Yeah. Southeast Missouri. That game went down to the wire, and so did Pitt's. And, I mean, they weren't necessarily the prettiest of basketball games. NBA fans will say, there was a lot of sloppy play or whatever. But those two contests are a perfect microcosm of everything that's great about March Madness. It's two teams that probably won't win it all, or even, go past on their best day, go past maybe the Sweet 16, but they're playing like it's their national championship, and they're playing on a national stage where there are no other college basketball games being played in that tournament that day. They're standalone games, and man, just a ton of fun, tons of Pitt fans, electric atmosphere, and it all lived up or maybe even exceeded the hype.
As Jeff Capel said after the game, it wasn't pretty, but it was beautiful. And I thought that was the best way to describe it because it was dramatic. It was passionate. I think what's truly impressive about this win, not just that Fede Federico didn't play and they already were missing John Hughley, who also entered the transfer portal the morning of the game. They were also missing Will Jeffress, that Dior Johnson never even played this year. So that's 4 scholarship players they're without in this game. Guillermo Diaz-Graham makes his first start of NCAA tournament history. He did make a start against VCU early in the season, but even still, putting him in there against a first team, all SEC forward like Tolu Smith, who had the best shooting field goal percentage of the SEC coming into the game, with a tall task, and he stood tall. He made a block in the end, but the defensive adjustments, and I gotta even say, even outside of the defense, just how the offense worked, this was a differently paced game that Pitt had played all season. Most of Pitt's win were high shooting, high speed, get the scoring up and run an efficient offense, and that's what carried them to wins with decent defense in a lot of their earlier games. But this game was a slugfest of defensive play. The defense locked in its best performance, I think, maybe even of the season. I know Mississippi State's not a great shooting team, but they were able to take away take away a lot of things from Mississippi State when they were trying to go inside, and that's with a freshman who's 7 foot tall and probably lighter than either of us. I think it's crazy to think this, but I think a lot of praise is deserved to go to Jeff Capel, his coaching staff, and how this team adapted yet again in a big game.
Yeah, I mean they had an excellent game plan. I mean you always want to attack your opponent where they're weakest, but for Pitt that was the only option. It wasn't we can play however we want, and as long as we execute, we'll win. It was we have to win this game a certain way, and Pitt found a way to do that. It dared Mississippi State to win the game from the outside, and early on, it looked like the Bulldogs were going to do that. They made four of their first 5 shots from 3, but they cooled off, including a wide open look at the final buzzer. You know, I mean, how many teams have a starting guard who knocks that down 9 times out of 10 in that scenario? So, yeah, that's the strategy, though. They dared them. They said, you're not going to beat us inside. They knew they were going to lose the battle on the glass. They did their best to limit the second chance opportunities. And I thought Pitt fought tremendously on the boards in the second half. And while the numbers don't necessarily reflect it, just the deflections and just the scrappiness, you saw guys diving all over the floor. You have to commend that. And I think that was the message that was portrayed. It was, look, it's not going to be a pretty one. We're going to have to dig deep here. But at the same time, this was a matchup that suited Pitt well, I think. If you look, pretty much every team it played this season that ran a slower pace, Pitt did pretty well against. You can point to Virginia, you can point to Northwestern, and those are 2 of their better wins. So I think that this kind of lined up well for the Panthers. All they had to do was go out and execute, and every single guy who played, essentially aside from Jorge Diaz-Graham, who only played 4 minutes, but the 6 main players who logged 15-plus minutes all had a key play in this victory. It was a total team effort.
I agree with that. You know, from Jamarius Burton's game winner to Nelly Cummings having several, he led the team with 15 points in the game. Blake Hinson, 2 logo 3-pointers that were just completely ridiculous, especially the second one, just the timing of it has. You see that Greg Elliott had some really big plays. And crazy enough, Greg Elliott, I was always just like, man, just let that guy shoot 3-pointers. He did hit 2, but he also had 13 points to go along with it. Jamarius Burton being on the bench for most of the second half as he got 4 fouls early, and then they come off the bench and make that play at the end there to win the game. He only had 6 points, but man, did he come up still huge for his team. I just think it again goes to all the things that we've been saying about this year's team, Pitt Panthers. They are not the best Pitt team that we've seen in the last 20 years or anything like that, but they are, I think, a legendary team in the history of the program for what they've done. And getting back to the images that we saw last night and just the environment that we were in, the feeling that I got, Noah, when we were sitting there courtside, you're typing your game story, I'm just looking around, and I'm seeing Coach Milan Brown just dapping up Blake Hinson while Blake Hinson's getting ready to talk to Bill Hillgrove, seeing Greg Elliott just run through all the fans, Heather Lyke standing in the tuggle, hugging every coach, every player who comes through it. And then if you guys were watching the broadcast, you got to go see her hug with Greg Elliott where like they lift each other up. It was just amazing. And if you're a Pitt fan, to me, this win is as big as any win that I think that they've had. This felt like a curse was lifted on the program after all the struggles they've gone since Jamie Dixon left.
Yeah, it's kind of Pitt's Cueto game in a way, I think.
Ooh, I like that.
Where it wasn't as big because it wasn't a 20-year drought and it wasn't at home, but it might as well have been at home. I mean, that building was as loud as the Peterson Event Center gets in the big ACC contest this year, especially the noise level when Blake Hinson hit that 3 with 3:06 left. I mean, the building erupted, and same for the Diaz-Graham block. And yeah, I think that's kind of what this is, where yes, it's not the best moment in Pitt history, but this is one that they'll look back at years from now because it was a classic, man. It was a tight finish, and it means so much because it's the first NCAA tournament win, I think, since 2014. It's the first time they played in the dance since 2016. And it feels like this group finally is out of Jamie Dixon's shadow now, that this program, I should say. And that's not easy to do when you let a legendary coach leave, the best coach probably in program history, and you replace him with one of the worst coaches in program history who kind of destroys everything, and you bring in a guy like Jeff Capel who had a vision and had the ability, but it just wasn't working out. And fans start to wonder, is this ever going to turn around? And this group made that happen. There's no more talk of this program can't do whatever without Jamie Dixon, or we don't have to hear about the Big East days anymore. And those days were special. Don't get me wrong. And this team would not have a chance if it were to play some of those Pitt Big East teams with DeJuan Blair and Sam Young or Brandon Knight and Julius Page and all those guys. But this team wrote its own chapter. This was the biggest win for Pitt since it moved to the ACC.
I'd agree with that entirely. But we got to talk about what they got to do next, because even though they're celebrating, they got to get ready for Iowa State. Who is Iowa State? We'll go over that in just a little bit and how Pitt might match up with them right here in the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk about our great sponsors at Yinzers in the Berg, the number one place for you to go to get your Pittsburgh sports merchandise. Hey, maybe you're feeling Pitt right now after that big win. Best place to go get some Pitt merchandise, as well as Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, anything Pittsburgh sports, is Yinzers in the Berg. They have 2 stores that you can visit in the Strip District, or if you can't get to the Strip District, go to their online website, yinzerspgh.com. At yinzerspgh.com, Yinzers in the Berg has Pittsburgh sports merchandise, apparel, accessories, and everything you could want. And it's updating every single week on the website, so you can see all the gear that they have and you can support your favorite Pittsburgh sports team. So go to Yinzers in the Berg right now. That's Yinzers in the Berg with 2 stores in the Strip District, and their website, yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Noah Hiles. We are your Pitt beat writers. We're doing a Pitt show, and yes, we will talk Steelers free agency at some point this week with all the moves they've made, bringing back Larry Ogunjobi, bringing back DeMonte Casey, signing Patrick Peterson, Nate Herbig, and now Cole Holcomb, the linebacker out of Washington. There's lots of moves the Steelers have made, but Pitt now faces a Friday 3:10 tip-off against Iowa State, a 6th seed from the Big 12. And Noah, you talked about how Pitt has played well against teams that have played at a slower pace this year. And I told you this in the car drive over here. I thought they could take Mississippi State. I think that Iowa State is another matchup just like that. If you go look at Iowa State, they were 9th in the Big 12 as far as points scored per game with 68.4. Their field goal percentage was 8th with 45%. Their 3-point percentage was 7th at 33.9%. They were not a high efficient team, but where they are good, defense. They were the number 1 defense in the Big 12 with 62.8 points per game. They're a team that I think lives with more guard play than necessarily as much as Mississippi State, but I think that this is a team that it's not a walkover. Pitt's not going to walk in and just get an easy win. It's going to be another scrap. But I think this is another team that Pitt matches up well with, and we've seen these Panthers in tight moments respond well to challenges. And I think that's where the Panthers may have an advantage, is their guys have lived on the edge all season long.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out, I mean, this Iowa State team was similar to Pitt in the sense it did not finish its regular season strong. It lost 4 of its last 5. It won 1 game, I believe, in the Big 12 tournament, but then got bounced by Kansas, which, I mean, you can't really blame them for losing to Kansas. Right, yeah, who doesn't lose to Kansas, right? But, yeah, I mean, this is a team that's not playing its best basketball right now. And you even point to its strength, like scoring defense. That's kind of a subjective stat when you consider pace of play. A lot of Big 12 teams, they allow more points because they play a lot faster. There's a lot more possessions. Thus, each team on the court, both teams on the court, have more chances to chuck up some shots. Teams like Baylor or Kansas State, they're playing a different style of basketball than Iowa State. And the style of basketball that the Cyclones play, as we've said, it's conducive to what Pitt does well. It allows for Pitt to kind of play its game and take a little pressure off of what it's struggling with. Still, I think, is defense. I mean, you can point to, Pitt holding a team under 60, but let's look at the team it held under 60. Let's look at some of the looks they missed. Let's look at what they had to offer as far as scoring goes and all of that. And this is something similar where you're not playing an elite scoring guard. There's no Isaiah Wong on Iowa State. There's no Kyle Filipowski on Iowa State. It's just a well-rounded team that they're going to kind of look to different guys at different times and different spots, but I don't think it's super hard to defend. And it's going to come down to Pitt getting open looks from the outside, in my opinion. And if it can replicate what it did in the first half, the Panthers have a great shot of winning. They can't allow the perimeter to be taken away from them mid-game or their entire game like we saw in the second half there. But it is a favorable matchup. I also think that if you just look, teams who get out of Dayton with a win typically end up having a pretty fun March. I think 2019 is the only year a team from the first 4 in Dayton since this part of the tournament was added didn't win at least one game in the field. So most of these teams who make it, they have a really good shot at going to at least the round of 32. And I think Pitt's probably the best out of the 4-11 seeds here. So why not the Panthers? Who knows?
I think it's a good question. Why not the Panthers? And to go back to your point about the scoring, the scoring totals on defense not being necessarily the answer, or not necessarily being the tell-all of how good a defense is. Iowa State's allowed field goal percentage is 42.2, Pitt's 42.4. Very similar there,
Right.
as far as the shots they've allowed up. Looking on Ken Palm, they're also very similar in 3-point percentages allowed on defense. The Panthers 33.2% allowed. The Cyclones 33.8% allowed on 3-point percentages. So Noah, I think that you can expect Iowa State is going to look at the tape that Pitt has been up against, and you and I pointed this out. Virginia Tech, exposed Pitt for being a team that if you press them on the outside, it's harder for them to get their rhythm going if they have to focus on driving and attacking the inside. If you take away the 3-point line, Mississippi State was doing that in the second half. Pitt went from making 8 threes in the first half to just 1 in the second. But I'll be intrigued though, because this is a different build team, like you said. There's no, they don't have a big like Tolu Smith that they can kind of balance themselves with there. I'll be intrigued to see, can the Cyclones keep up the pace if they want to attack Pitt. I mean, there were points where Blake Hinson and Greg Elliott were getting the ball at the logo and they were getting pressed by Mississippi State. Yeah. I'll be very intrigued to see if Iowa State follows that plan of attack and how long they could keep it up if they went with it for a long time.
Yeah, I think it comes down to ball movement there, Carter. I mean, if you look, the second half, Pitt was dribbling the air out of the basketball a lot of these possessions. And I get that comes with pressure, right? When it's harder to move the ball around the perimeter or even anywhere near the timeline when you have a defender up in your face. But they've got to find a way to create space and just move around and get those looks. Because in the first half, when those threes were falling, the ball was flying around. If you look, the second half, I haven't had a chance to go back and watch the game yet. We're running on about 3 hours sleep, and we're about to drive from Dayton to Greensboro here as soon as this recording ends. But when we go back and watch, I'll be counting how many possessions did just whoever took the ball up the floor stand at the top of the key dribbling until there were 10 seconds left in the shot clock. I feel like that was a very common thing from Nike Sabandi and Nelly Cummings. And while sometimes that worked, where they were able to create isolation, find a lane, get to the hoop, and make a nifty move at the basket to either draw a foul or finish with the score. That's not how you want to win if you're Pitt. Right. That's not how your offense is built. Maybe if it's Burton, but Burton doesn't stand at the top of the key when he does that either. He dribbles a couple times and he finds his path. And if it's backing someone down, that's one thing. Or if it's rolling off a screen, that's another thing. But you can't just stand there and kill clock against a team like this. Unless you're up by a lot of points, which I don't think either team will be. I expect this to be, a game where there are a lot of lead changes again, where, the winning team's biggest lead might be less than 10 points. And the losing team's biggest lead will probably be around that same margin as well. But when you're playing in a game like that, you just got to play your game. You can't, when you slow down your pace, you're playing into what your opposition wants you to do if you're Pitt. And you can't let that happen. You got to move the ball, got to find a way to get bodies off bodies and keep things flowing.
No, I agree. And I think that was something that you and I were kind of just talking about. Like, they're not shooting threes. They're not playing their style of ball. That was worrisome in the second half, but they pulled it out. And I think that's also why the win over Mississippi State, I thought, was even more special, was because Mississippi State got Pitt to go to play their style of ball, and the Pitt still won. Mm-hmm. I don't think Pitt should try to live on that on that style, though. They need to be able to dictate the pace of the game. But there's a lot of teams in March Madness. March Madness has begun. The play-in round is the tournament. Everyone's kind of made that clear that is the NCAA tournament. People say that, play-in games aren't the actual NCAA tournament. Yes, it is. And now Pitt's going to be playing in the round of 64 here, and they tip off Friday. But Noah and I want to go over our brackets and go over the different regions, maybe some dark horses, some players. We'll give you our Final Fours and our picks here, who's going to win it all. We'll do all that right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Noah Hiles. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Noah Hiles of the Pitt Beat. Noah, let's take a step back from Pitt for a second. Let's look at March Madness.
I would love to.
the craziness that is always this year. All right, so you have all your one seed. We have the whole seeds are played out. There's still a couple more playing games to determine, some of the last people that make it in there. But let's talk about some of the picks that I think people are going to be most impressed by. Give me some of your top round one upsets that you think are good picks for people who are filling out their brackets right now.
All right. So I want to send a disclaimer. The first bracket I filled out was in 2005. I got the entire Final Four right. I have not done well since. I think I might have won one in college, but I'm normally always wrong. So, this is a good time to fade me. But just looking at it, some first round upsets that I could see happening. The first one that comes to mind to me is Kent State over Indiana. I really, really like Kent State's backcourt. They have the MVP of the MAC, Sincere Carey. Pittsburghers might remember him from his time at Duquesne. Really talented guy, and in veteran backcourts, they win in March. And just looking at the numbers there, the spread, the fact that the Hoosiers, who have been a really, really good team, they also have a local guy running their offense with Jalen Hood-Schifino, freshman of the year, I believe, in the Big Ten. But I just think that veteran presence the Golden Flashes have at the guard will make things close. I could see that being one, and I always kind of like betting against the Big Ten in the tournament. Conference really just doesn't do well. Another one that I like, a scrappy one, is another 13 over a 4, and that's Iona over UConn. I love how Iona's analytics look and everything, and UConn, I just haven't been impressed with UConn this year. I thought they were a really good team in the beginning of the season, but this is a team that kind of I don't know. It didn't really do much in Big East play to where I would put it in the same conversation as a Xavier or a Marquette. And that's, kind of crazy for me to say, considering I think Marquette's a 2 and Xavier's a 3, and UConn's not that far behind at a 4, but I don't know. Nothing really impresses me with that UConn group. So those would be two major upsets. If you're looking for a team that could go far, that's not a 1, 2, 3, or 4. My pick would be Memphis. I like Memphis a lot. Memphis is super talented. I again, really, really great guards. Kendrick Davis, I believe, is their star player's name. And they're a team that was a little banged up this year, but they've been playing some great basketball recently. They lost it on the buzzer in their regular season finale to Houston. And then they won pretty convincingly over Houston in the AAC championship. And granted, that was when Saucer was out, so the Cougars didn't have their best player, and I really don't think they were getting a 1 seed regardless, so that game didn't mean as much to them. But still, I love how Memphis matches up against Purdue in the second round. I think it'll have a tough time against Duke if Duke were to meet up with it in the Sweet 16. But yeah, I think that the Tigers could go on a little bit of a run there. Or the team that the Tigers are playing. I think the best first round matchup in this field is that 8-9 game against FAU, a 30-plus win team who can shoot the lights out in any gym it plays in. So that'll be a fun game, and I think the winner of that one will take down Purdue, and that'll be the first 1 seed to fall. So those are some of my upsets. What about you, Chris? I didn't pick all of those, but those are ones I have my eye on. Do you have any other sleepers that you have your eye on?
My rule is every year I got to pick a 5-12. I got to pick a 5-12 upset.
It's a good rule.
I'm going with VCU over St. Mary's. I saw St. Mary's get bounced at the end of the WCC tournament. I think that VCU's defense could make this an interesting. Both defensive metrics seem to look good. I just really felt the way that St. Mary's ended their season, VCU could come in there and get a big win there. I got some easier ones. I have USC taking out Michigan State 10 over 7. I have Penn State getting into the second round as well. But I'm right with you. I think Memphis. I think that they can handle Florida Atlantic, and I think they match up very well with Purdue. I think that would set up a good stage, because I also think Duke's going to ride a hot hand, go into there, and I think it's going to be a good game. But I'm right with you. Duke is too talented right now. I think that they have the bigs that would mess kind of Memphis up, because they also have the guards that can kind of run with Memphis in that situation. I also have Kentucky as a 6 seed meeting up with Duke, and I believe in the Elite 8. So they're another team that I have my eye on. I try to avoid. I go chalk with certain situations, but I try to avoid chalk where I can, as far as the easy picks.
And those 5-6s, it's a different thing when the 5-6s are Duke and Kentucky.
Yeah,
like when you have Calipari and all those 5 stars or transfers or whatever. I mean, they still have Shigwe, he's the player of the year last year, and you have Duke, who's red hot. And just to add a little note there, as far as first round matchups go, poor Oral Roberts, a team that I thought for sure they would be a team that would once again make a deep run. They have so much talent. But they just drew a horrible first round matchup against Duke.
Worst 5-seed situation you could be in playing Duke.
If the season went on another 2 weeks, Duke would have probably been a 3-seed. I mean, that's just how well the Blue Devils are playing. And listen, like, crazier things have happened. We've seen conference tournament champions who look to be world beaters. I mean, a lot of people had Kentucky winning it all in their bracket last year, and it got bounced in the first round by St. Peter's. So, I mean, it could happen. Oral Roberts was a team pretty much like the last month and a half. I was like, I don't care where they're put. I'm picking them in the first round. And then I saw them place with Duke, and I was like, yeah, I'm not picking them to win in the first round. So, yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
No, I get that. I get that entirely. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, but one of the teams I think that people should keep an eye on is Pitt. I think if they ride a hot hand, they could beat Iowa State, and they get to Xavier. I think they think they would take a good shooting performance, but I think if Pitt can survive Iowa State's defense and kind of play the way that they have been, I think they would be due for a really good shooting performance. And if that came against Xavier, that would be an amazing win, and that would get them to the Sweet 16. I'm not guaranteeing it, but it's something I have my eye on, just the way that they play. It's something that we were saying all year. I felt like, man, if this team could get to the dance and they could shoot well, they can go on a hot streak on shooting well, I think that they could be a problem for almost anybody. I said it all year long. Pitt can lose to anybody, and we saw that with Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, and some of the other losses they had this year. But I feel like they can also beat almost anyone out there as long as they come with their shooting and they play their style of ball. But can they? That'll be something to find out. All right, let's go to our Final Four here. And I have to admit, this is where I kind of went. I did go a little bit of
Let's do Elite Eight then. Let's do Elite Eight and work our way in.
Let's do an Elite Eight.
Yeah.
All right, give me your Elite Eight teams and who you got winning.
All right, so my Elite Eight, I have in the South region, which is the top left of the bracket for those who still print it out like I like to do. I just haven't had a chance to do it. I have Arizona over Virginia. I love the matchup for Virginia against Alabama's young backcourt in the Sweet 16. So I have the Cavaliers winning that one, but I like Arizona. They're playing really good basketball right now. So they will advance to the Final Four, where they will play Duke, who I have beating Kansas State in the East region final. So Duke, Kansas State, Arizona, Virginia are half of my Elite Eight. And then my other half of the Elite Eight, a nice Lone Star State showdown, Houston against Texas. I think that will be one of the best games of the tournament if it does take place, because, I mean, you got Houston trying to fight for the opportunity to play a Final Four in its home city, and a Texas team that's kind of had a really special run after its head coach was let go for doing some pretty bad things. The way it's rallied and continued to play well has been a fantastic story in college basketball, and it's super talented. Marcus Carr, Pitt fans might remember that name, one of the best players on that Longhorn squad. But I got the Cougars winning that one to get to the Final Four. And then my final in the West region is Kansas over Gonzaga. So I really like the Jayhawks. I think that, Gonzaga is always a solid pick in March, especially when they have guys like Drew Timme, who have seemingly been playing for Gonzaga since I was, in elementary school, it feels like. But overall, I think the Jayhawks are loaded. I have high expectations for them. So to recap my Elite Eight, I have Arizona over Virginia, Duke over Kansas State, Kansas over Gonzaga, and Houston over Texas to form my Final Four. What about you, Chris?
We're similar in our bracket in a lot of places. I also have Virginia beating Alabama, but I have Baylor beating Virginia in the Elite Eight. I think I like the way that they play. I think Baylor, Arizona, if that matchup can happen, a 2-3 seed,
that will be fun.
16. We need to find wherever we need to watch in Greensboro, and that will be out of.
That won't be in Greensboro.
Yeah, we have to find wherever we're at. We will just need to be post up and watch, because I can't wait to see a game like that. But then Virginia and Baylor, I have Baylor coming out on top, but Tony Bennett, man, I love the way that he coaches. I know it's ugly basketball and people hate watching it, but man, I am impressed by the way that Virginia sticks to their plan. A little bit of old school Big East basketball in me, just the way that they play. On the other side, we have the same exact thing. I have Houston in Texas. I have Houston winning that game there. Going down to the East, I have Duke versus Kentucky in the Elite Eight. I think that Duke is going to be strong. I have them winning just like you do. And then I have Kansas versus UCLA. I like Gonzaga to get to the Sweet 16, but I think the Bruins would do well against them. But I think Kansas, though, they're one of my top dogs in this tournament. So here we are, Final Four.
Well, hang on. I got to say that UCLA-Gonzaga game, that's a rematch, one of the best games in tournament history. 2021, the Jalen Suggs half-court buzzer beater in overtime. Mm-hmm. Classic.
That was a great one. And again, I think it'll be crazy, but that's also why I think UCLA is going to be ready this time around.
And those both of those teams have guys still on the. Sorry, I'm college basketball geeking out right now. I love March Madness. Let's talk Final Four. Sorry.
Who doesn't love March Madness?
Right. Yeah.
Best tournament in sports. I've always been enamored by it, and the beautiful thing is that you don't have to, like in the NFL. I'm out here breaking down which stats here and there. You know, throw all that away. You don't necessarily need the stats if you want to be junkies like us. You can just watch and just enjoy as a casual fan, and that's one of the most awesome things there. And again, I think it's awesome that Pitt's part of the dance this year to kind of be part of this atmosphere. Jeff Capel even talked about how he missed it and everything. So a lot of emotion there. But let's go to our Final Fours. I got Duke beating Baylor and Kansas beating Houston to make the championship game. What do you got?
We've been spending too much time together. I also have Duke and Kansas in the final. It's like all we do is travel and talk sports together, Carter. What the hell? But no, yeah, I love how the Blue Devils have been playing. I think that what's the name of that region? The South region, I think, is very weak. I mean, Alabama is super talented, but it's just, if they can make it to the Final Four after all the off-court stuff that's taking place, I'll be pretty surprised. And if you just look at the coaches they got to go against to win that region, you got Bob Huggins maybe in the second round, and then Tony Bennett in the Sweet 16, and then Coach Drew at Baylor, or Arizona, who's just a really good team. Whatever. It's not necessarily talent, but it's just going to be a messy region there. I could see that being the surprise one. And Duke is the hottest team in basketball. So yeah, those are two interesting regions there. But yeah, I think that Duke and Kansas are probably the best two teams right now in the country.
All right, then for all the marbles, who you have winning it all, and what's your predictor's tiebreaker score? I'm going to keep my hands here so you can't see. You can see I'm not changing anything. I have my picks logged in here. We have a Post-Gazette pool that we put together here. I'm going to leave my hands up. Who do you have winning, and what is your final score?
For the first time since 2007, we will have a back-to-back NCAA tournament champion, Rock Chalk Jayhawk, baby. I got Kansas winning it all once again. 77-70 is my final score. Bill Self will assert himself as one of the greatest to ever stand on a college basketball sideline, and just an absolute dynasty being formed there. Where are they at? Topeka? I don't know where Kansas's campus is located. I just watch them on TV. But nonetheless, I got the Jayhawks. What about you, Carter? I'm assuming you picked Kansas as well?
I picked Kansas as well. Yeah. Though I have it going down to the wire. I got 82-80 Kansas. Dude, I think it's going to come down to another last-second shot where they win at the buzzer. It's going to be another dramatic finish. I love March Madness, man. I'm here awesome for all the drama, and we're here for all the coverage here on March Madness. We're in Dayton right now. Like I said, we're about to pick up. I gotta pack up all my podcasting equipment here, throw it in the bag, and throw it in the rental. And we are driving to Greensboro, where you can get all of our coverage of Pitt taking on Iowa State for a 3:10 tip in Greensboro, North Carolina. We're headed there. Catch all of our content at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Also, check out this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right here on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. But if you want all of our Pittsburgh Post-Gazette content, you can also get it in the same places. It's coming out all the time. We'll have a Pitt mailbag coming out soon as well to kind of address any questions that you guys have on Pitt basketball and Pitt spring football, which has started up. Abby Schnabel's been covering that for us while we've been on the road. A lot of great content coming your way, and we'll have more Steelers talk with their free agency moves at the end of the week. Stay tuned right here for more at the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll see you again very soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.